Welcome back to the You're Not Crazy podcast, where we shine a light on survivor stories, bring awareness to various forms of abuse, and explore the intersections of faith, trauma, and healing. I'm Kendra, your host. We hope that Leigh's journey has offered some valuable insights. For those who've experienced abuse, hearing another person's story can be deeply affirming. It's a reminder that we're not alone in facing these struggles. And for those who are seeking to understand or support others, we hope you've gained a clearer view of the roots and complexities of these cycles. Today's episode is all about reflecting on Leigh's story. We'll be hearing from her directly as she shares the lessons she's learned, looking back with the benefit of hindsight. This episode is a little different. We're keeping this conversation natural and open, no narration or storyline, just an organic discussion between the three of us. Also, for our final episode of Season 1, we'll be joined by Dr. Warren Lamb, a pastor, biblical counselor, and founder of Truth and Love. Dr. Lamb is a leader in his field, focusing on educating the church about domestic oppression and narcissism. You won't want to miss it. All right, let's begin our final session with Leigh. Okay, so we're back together. We've got the whole gang this time, and this is kind of one of the more fun episodes for you, Leigh, I'm sure, because we've, completed your story. You've been very open and vulnerable with us, so thank you. And now we talked about that it was important to you to kind of share some of the lessons you've learned, some of the insights you've gained from your journey. So let's just kick it off with whatever you want to kind of start with today.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're so right in that anytime we go through challenging situations or traumatic events in our life, I know for me, one of my prayers is always, please let this be useful. God, use my pain. Like, we never want it to just feel like it's for naught. So thank you for letting me share this part, because it encourages me that there might be something worth gleaning from all the challenges and difficulty. And I think sometimes, as I look back, I can get really lost in regret and sadness and grief, and all of that's normal, but it's not always productive or helpful to myself or others. So it's much better to look for some things that I might be able to hand down to someone else going through similar situations. And there's probably a lot of them, but I'll try to articulate a few that come to mind right away. And I think the first one is just learning how to trust yourself and not doubting your intuition, your gut when something feels off, and not being so committed to the vision or the dream that you have at all costs. I'm going to make this work at all costs.
Yeah.
Because I see enough of the ingredients that can make this happen. I think about, like, if I was going to make a cake and I had everything but the butter, like, it would still really be bad, right? Like,
but the potential
is there, right? And I think about when I was first dating Jack, like, I knew in my heart of hearts that something was off, but there was so many other things that I chose to put my eyes on as distraction that were part of those ingredients. And I just thought I could bridge that gap or get by with not having those things and pretend. I was a pretender for a long, long time. So I think that's my first encouragement to anyone, is just recognize when you have those moments of instinct, that gut check, that something's not right here. And then notice what you do with that, because oftentimes, for me, and I think for a lot of women, we think, well, what I do there is I fix it.
Yeah.
I improve it. I love it harder. Mm-hmm. I give more. So notice, like, how are you resolving that gut check? And, are you sacrificing yourself and your wellness and your truth to do so?
And taking full responsibility.
Absolutely.
For
like,
that.
This is my project. I signed up for this, So at least in a partnership, that's not, I don't believe, what God calls us to. And I know that there are lots of different relationships with people suffering with narcissistic tendencies. Like, for my children, they have a different recovery process and journey because it was their father. So they've got a lot of other pain to deal with. It may be your sibling, it may be your child, but you have to continually factor yourself into the equation of who gets cared for. That's, I think, my biggest first takeaway.
So that's really good. So as I'm sitting here, because Kass and I are survivors as well, and I'm like, I don't even know if I would have known what would I have done with the feeling of something is off or wrong.
Right.
Like, what do you do with that?
I think first of all, like, if I could talk to my younger self in those moments, is to say, slow down. I think sometimes we get on the trajectory of like falling in love or thinking about getting married, especially in the Christian world. And so I would say, like, slow the heck down and go spend time loving yourself and just kind of detaching from all of that. I remember trying to backpedal and slow things down, and it was met with, well, you either know or you don't know. And very quickly it felt like a threat that this love and all these other things that had enough right with it, those things were going to be withdrawn from me. I was going to lose the potentiality of what might be here. If I could look back, I would say, like, let it go then. If this person's not willing to slow down with you and pace with your needs, this is not the person for you. That should be a red flag.
Right. You're not synced up already.
You're feeling the pressure of meeting that person's demands
to conform
instead of your own. Thank you. That's the word I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good.
I feel like I just want to like sit with that one sentence that you said. If you feel like you're losing something, let it go.
Don't chase after it because it matches most of your dream.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, I had this kind of poverty mindset of I'll never have enough, or I won't get the love I want, and I can love anyone, right? And somebody will love me back if I work hard enough for it. It was really unhealthy. I didn't know at the time. I was super young and I had my own stuff to unpack, and been so proud of my daughter, seeing her at that same stage of life, to say, like, I recognize I need to slow down and do my therapy and do my work, become self-aware before I even try to date anyone. And, you know, I did not have that mindset at all.
What did intuition feel like to you in hindsight?
In hindsight, I think there were a couple moments where I felt scared that this person wasn't matching who I thought he was, or like he was projecting differently, like one day caring and kind and another day very dismissive and cold. There were moments that I couldn't be myself and that he wanted to edit me strongly. That didn't feel good, that I should have paid attention to. So the second thing I would say is trust the people who love you and who do know you, that they have something to say that's worth hearing, even if the way they're delivering that message is not how you would like them to deliver it, right? So if someone's telling you that they're concerned or like something doesn't feel right to them, pay attention to that. And when I brought those concerns forward to Jack, it was always met with, like, we're suffering for Christ.
Yeah.
There was always that, you know, flavor brought in of Christian persecution, people not understanding that we're different because we're living for Christ.
Yeah.
And that was super confusing.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that before you even went into, you know, trusting the people that love you. That's a really tough thing because you have people that love you. Sometimes they can be overprotective. Sometimes they can hold you back at times. So it's like you really have to identify those safe people that know you really well. You don't want to just open yourself up to any voice. But then when you've committed yourself to something and you feel strongly about it and then they raise a concern, that is exactly the category that I think a lot of Christians would put it in. Like, this is of God. We've decided this is for us, and these voices are here to test God's plan.
Absolutely.
And we immediately need to reject them. There's no room to consider. There's no room to entertain. It is immediately in this category of the enemy or of opposition, and we completely push them out and we move forward with more persistence even.
Yeah.
This is fuel for the fire to this is what we need to do.
That's so
and
true.
What I hear you saying is if they're people that you love and are safe and are trusted, we have to create space for those voices and to help me understand why you feel this way.
Yeah, I think, first of all, anytime we're saying all of them or us,
Yeah.
and all of their message is evil and wrong, and we're on the side of righteousness and God's side, and it's so divisive. So wherever that plays out in this type of scenario, or in listening to one another with regard to what's going on in the world and how we lead our lives and how we live together in community, it's super dangerous and should be avoided at all costs, because that division doesn't allow us to find or seek truth or any common ground or see the humanity in it. Can get so dangerous because we're just couching the others as being harmful, dangerous, evil. And to me, that's very Nazi Germany-ish.
Yeah, I was going
right?
to say.
I mean, it's not...
Yeah, it's what you see in like cult
scary,
mentalities, which...
Scary stuff, yeah.
A lot of our guests that will be coming on in the future have genuinely been a part of a cult, and that is a cult mentality to me. Like this generalization of us versus them.
It's so dangerous.
And there's no conversation, there's no discourse, there's no listen to understand. And then it's an isolating place too.
Right. There's no room then for your own voice, because now you're subscribing only to this set of rules or set of themes of how we live. And so now we've factored out our own intuition, our own voice, our own logic, our own wisdom for whomever is authoring this. And I find it quite scary. But going back to my relationship, that's exactly what happened. And it continued to happen throughout the marriage. And it was an us and them split. And it did isolate me from my family. And I felt at odds with myself, because there was part of myself that didn't want to do that. And I didn't know how to reconcile what was happening and how my partner was painting that picture. And it was just so disorienting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I relate a lot to what you're saying in my story. And I think that there were times where the pressure of being forced to reject what my family was trying to communicate and say to me, and then siding with my husband, it was like the pressure of being in the middle of that was the thing that almost took me out at times. And so there are other options besides we're fully rejecting this and I'm fully siding with my husband. And I hear you saying that. And so I just want to say thank you. And I think that's really important for people in these situations. Like any spot where you're getting forced to isolate more, that is a red flag.
Yes. And when it's an all or nothing, them or us, and when there's then scripture brought in, like you're to leave and cleave and we're to be one, and all that scripture gets tossed in too, and then you think, okay, that's what I signed up for. You are right, so you must be all the way right. And it's just maddening. It makes me so crazy mad now, because that person is not even respecting or listening to the concern at hand. It goes right into that kind of rhetoric. And I see that even now with politicians, right? We go right into rhetoric instead of what's the issue we really need to be discussing and what's the problem we need to be solving together from different perspectives, and not an us and them. Yeah, trust the people in your life, and also trust that there are people that have gone on this journey ahead of you. And so if you don't have family that's speaking into your life, know that we're here. Like there are those of us that are on the other side that are calling you over, Red Rover, like come over. We know what it's like to go through this journey. So trust that there's someone in the world that is just a step or two ahead of you that's willing to share their story and the lessons that they've gleaned. So you're not alone in this.
Also, just so we, obviously took some notes about some of your learnings as we were kind of like going through your story and learning it and hearing it and stuff. And I think what goes with the conversation we're having right now is this new faith that you stepped into that embraced you. You felt the sense of belonging. You felt an identity. Jack's family was also very embracing, and they, all of that. And so it's like when you finally feel that sense of belonging and purpose and identity, women like us, we tend to want to go all in. That feels really good. And I think that, you talked about that a lot in episode 1 and 2. What would you say now in terms of going all in, and what you would have done differently to make sure that you didn't go all in a way where you ended up how we're talking about right now?
Losing myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for young women, and I wish I would have done this more, to really understand who they are and to kind of reconcile and reclaim their childhood and to feel so good in their own skin that they're not searching for that sense of identity and belonging to another person, another family, another community. I think if I had done that, I wouldn't have been so desperate to fit in somewhere. I would have been more solid in who I am, and I would have attracted a different type of person instead of, reaching for everyone else. And I had gone over my head too. Like, I moved from the Midwest all the way out to the West Coast on my own. So sometimes I think in our big dreams, like if I were, again, to talk to my younger self, I might say, pump the brakes a little bit. Go more slowly into your adventures and into your dreams so that you don't position yourself to be so alone and maybe overwhelmed there, where now any community or any person is going to feel so good because you're so alone. The world is different now. I didn't even have cell phones. We didn't have social media. So, being on your own, truly driving across country without a phone or without knowing who you're going to meet on the other side was kind of badass, but also a little extreme.
Yeah, I was going to say, taking risks and being passionate like that is totally celebrated in Christianity, because if you're risking for God, you're taking a leap of faith, you're doing something bold. And yes, there are times that is good and should be celebrated, but you're saying it's unpopular and it's not as glitzy or glamorous to slow down and to learn yourself and wait till you're 30 to get married. No, I'm just kidding.
No, truly. No, I preach that all the time. But yeah, just was in a super big hurry to do it all.
What do you guys think about, and this is kind of a question for all three of us, because I remember a point in my healing journey where I was really contemplating this. There were a couple ministries or churches that I was a part of where I felt like I had found my tribe. We were all like-minded. We were believing the same things. We were living the same way. We were disciplined in the same ways. We were spending our days in the same way. And so that sense of like-mindedness and belonging feels really good. But later down the road, when I kind of started unraveling from some spiritual beliefs that were really abusive, I realized, gosh, I didn't have anyone in my life that thought differently, that lived differently, that could give a different perspective. And come to find out, I was a part of some cults, which we won't go into, but just the concept of it's okay to go all in maybe sometimes, but make sure you have some people on the outside, so to speak, that are still in your life, that you're doing life with, that you can hear some contrasting thoughts or some contrasting beliefs. That's what I would do differently.
Yeah.
And you can change your mind, if you do go all in, because some of us just have that personality. We're gonna travel across the country. We're gonna take the risks and do all the things and try to do it all. And it's okay after doing that for a year to say, all right, I'm gonna do something differently because this isn't serving me. And it's not a failure to change your mind. It's actually growth.
Yeah, that's really good. But yeah, to your point, I think that is so important, and it's important that we raise our children to do that. I put my kids in a VBS at a Korean church. They were like, Mom, we don't even speak the language. And I'm like, well, it's good for you to understand what it feels like to be a minority.
You will be cultured.
You will learn. And by the end of the week, they love the food. They made friends, and there was a language barrier there. But I want them to see, and for me, it took traveling out of the country a little bit more to recognize that as Americans, we don't have all the answers. And as Christian Americans, we've got a lot to learn.
Yeah.
To have people of different backgrounds and beliefs, I think, is really, really healthy.
Okay, so what else, Leigh, in hindsight, is kind of coming up right now?
There's a lot of things I could share, but one thing that really troubles me to this day is that some people will weaponize scripture.
Yeah.
They'll use it out of context to kind of underwrite whatever it is that they want from you. Right? So love keeps no record of wrongs, or even honor your father and your mother. I see that happening with narcissists and their children. And anytime I think that you're being told scripture in a way to either manipulate or scare you, and it invalidates the other conversation that you should be having, it's a red flag. So when someone dismisses your concerns or your feelings and instead throws scripture at you, like, run. That to me is just incorrigible. It's awful.
Run where? Because that's super common.
I don't know. Run away. Run far away. But to push back, at least, to say, like, I love that my children have learned to do that with their father. So he'll throw scripture at them, for example. And so they play the same game and throw it right back, with regard to just how God doesn't like people that are cloaked in anger, for example.
Haughty.
Yeah, or haughty, or da-da-da. So I'm like, wow. And I don't get involved. So I guess my advice too for parents, when you're doing your healing work, trust that your children are also going to need to do their healing work. And that as they age, the narcissist is who he is or who she is. He is going to show up in the world again and again. And it's not just with you. They can't help themselves but to be that person with others. So in my case, like family members, even on his side, and our children all came to the same conclusion in their own time.
Yeah.
And my coach was very clear to me, like, step out of that, because it was hurting me to see him hurt them. And I felt like for a while he would hurt them in order to get a rise out of me. Mm-hmm. That's when I would reconnect with him. Like, what are you thinking? Kind of conversation. And she really encouraged me to step out as they were getting older, to let them come to their own conclusions. And they all did. And sadly, like, all of them have withdrawn from his relationship, as well as his own mom and sisters. And to me, it just breaks my heart. I can't imagine being a person who has no connection with family or their own children. But then I look at it and I think, you did that to yourself. And I had nothing to do with it, even though he would love to blame me for doing that. I didn't. My coach / therapist did a beautiful job of helping me restrain myself from trying to say, like, the sky is falling down. Do you see? And just trusting that this person is going to be who they are, and other people will eventually come to understand. You don't have to over-explain your life or your situation or your decisions, but you feel like it initially because there's so much shame attached in our culture of divorce and the woman leaving, and then they do everything possible to shine a light on you being a horrid individual.
Yeah.
Right. But just continue to love on yourself and give yourself grace and time, and don't feel like you have to explain yourself to anyone.
Yeah, that's really hard though. Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to what you said about weaponizing scripture, because that is a form of spiritual abuse, which spiritual abuse is a big focus on this podcast. So we will unpack different types of spiritual abuse. But I would say, like, just off cuff, if someone's using scripture to shame you, pressure you, kind of feel like it's like pushing you down,
scare you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then that is what weaponizing scripture is. So scripture should, in its true form, should elevate and encourage and draw you back to your true self and kind of confirm within you the things that are right and good, not what we just described.
Right.
So yeah, we'll unpack that some more, but that may be, what that feels like when you weaponize it.
Yeah. And it feels like, too, it's out of context and coming at you from every angle. That's not the way. I mean, I went to seminary, and the way that we studied scripture was contextually, unpacking it within the story and the culture and everything else. So when someone's just throwing a line at you, that's really different. Don't just take it at face value, that even if it feels like it might even come close to fitting your situation, that it is.
Yeah. And when you guys say that, what's also important is, like, someone can quote something, but if their character and their personhood is not of integrity and good, like, it doesn't matter what they're quoting. It's just words. Like, you can't disconnect the message from the person.
Right.
Like,
no, it's almost more shameful. And that's where my kids have gotten. Like, how can you throw all that at us and yet treat us like this? What? The hypocrisy here is huge. I can give you an example from my kids too. What I think is, like, when they say we value mutual respect, gentleness, kindness, love, and you don't show that to us, I don't need to quote unquote honor you
or make you an authority in my life.
Put you in a position of authority to speak over me, especially now that I'm an adult. Or it's not just blind obedience, blind respect as an authority figure. And that's what my kids have said. Like, hey, Father's Day is not just something that we're going to pretend when you haven't spoken to us for a year or so, or you've treated us poorly, or you've spoken ill about our mom over and over again. No. Now they're not being cruel or mean or disrespectful. They're just being detached.
Having boundaries.
Yeah. And there's healthy detachment. I think that's one thing that I think I also really value is I can hold compassion from a detached posture that looks different than what it used to look like. So I can offer love and pray for someone and not be connected to their chaos. And I think a lot of women especially have a hard time doing that. They feel like to love means to serve. To love means to continue in this posture of subservient abuse or whatever, and martyrdom, yeah. And really I can love and hold respect for myself and love this person or offer them love, and I don't have to sit and hate, but I definitely can draw some clear boundaries and detach.
Yeah, so I think what I hear you guys saying, and I'm just going to repeat this for our listeners and you tell me if this is right, that there are roles, okay, within the American culture at least, like father, mother, pastor, these roles of authority that are paired with certain scriptures about how we are to treat those roles, and that those roles combined with certain scriptures get weaponized for the sake of control and manipulation, and basically coercion is another word I would use. And anytime that those roles with scriptures are being used in that way, that we have freedom and permission to step outside of what we feel like our response should be, which is to submit or just try harder, all the things. Is that what I hear you saying?
Absolutely. And I think, it goes even beyond that. If they're other leaders said they're servants of God, or this is the head of your household, that type of terminology, but they are not serving, they're not loving, they're not kind, compassionate, they don't align with godly character, we're not called to obey or submit,
overlook,
or avoid what we're seeing. Like, we're called to live in truth and love and to speak forward. And I don't know, not set our own wisdom aside because of those lines that have been given to us, or the prompts that, well, this is the godly figure that we're to respect.
Yeah, and I think, like, using Jesus as an example, we would see this play out with the Pharisees. Like, the Pharisees had the title, they had the words, they knew the rules, they thought they could just show up and spout the rules in any moment, in any way. And I love that we just see Jesus like totally dissing them, like so much, just be like, no thanks. Like, But I think that gives us permission to do the same.
I think we're bound to. I mean, I think like we're honor bound to do so for the next generation, for the greater good, to question and to call that out and to stand up and say, no. Because oftentimes, as we have seen in the news again and again and again, behind that curtain is something altogether different than what's being projected. And it's really ugly.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So Leigh, you just said blind loyalty when we paused. That I think describes the whole thing of what we were just talking about.
It's so sick. Yes. Anytime that you feel like you're being asked to be blindly allegiant and loyal to a person or a concept or an ideology in the name of God, and you're not allowed to question or unpack or dialogue, be afraid. Like, that's scary. Yeah. That is so scary to me. That is not what I think God had in mind for his people. I was always raised that we're called to question. God is big enough to question with respect. Say, I don't understand. Please show me. Increase my faith. Help me. Doesn't want that blind allegiance just without our involvement. I mean, even when Jesus healed people, he asked them to be involved, right? Like, pick up your mat and walk, wash your eyes and see. Like, there was some level of participation, that engagement. And I feel like we're not robots. God never created us to be robots.
Right. We have free will. We should engage our free will And it's okay to ask questions and step out of this is just what I think because this person is this role in my life. It doesn't matter if you're harming me or hurting me. I still have to serve you in the same way that's expected. No.
Absolutely
just
not.
no.
Like, I can excuse all this terrible behavior because you're in this role. No, there needs to still be accountability.
Well, and Jesus just repetitively invited people. He just kept inviting people. He wasn't a dictator where he said, if you don't participate in this way, here's this horrible consequence that's going to happen to you tonight or tomorrow or next week. And I think that if we want to be like Jesus, if that is our value system, then that invitation as opposed to these demands that we're putting on others makes a lot of sense to me and is a really kind way to show up in the world and to ourselves.
The other point I was thinking earlier to mention is that it's so important to, I'm trying to think of how to say this without sounding too counselor-ish.
You can sound counselor-ish.
But one other point I think is to know your inner child and the work that you have to do with your inner child to heal and reclaim part of your childhood narrative, because so many of us have patterns that we're taught. And sometimes what I see with clients and in myself is that the inner child takes the driver's seat when it gets activated, when there's some kind of trauma or drama happening, and our higher wisdom goes to the back seat, and it needs to be flip-flop. So we have to learn how to heal that part of ourselves so that we don't find ourselves again and again in relationships that are mimicking those patterns that we learned early on. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. Another thing I want to highlight from your story, and I know this is probably involved in all of the survivor stories that we're going to tell to some degree, is the concept of, how I put it is like bringing the body into the equation. Okay, so when we're living in these blind loyalties, okay, we're playing the part we expect ourselves and others are expected to play. When that gets disjointed and it gets unhealthy, oftentimes the body communicates through physical symptoms. Now, if you had said bring the body into the equation to me 10 years ago, I would be like, what the heck are you talking about? But a lot of us, our breaking point has come because we've gotten physically ill. Mm-hmm. We've had no idea that anything's wrong or that we have a different choice or option, but the body shuts down and then we have to start reaching out for help. So that happened to you. Mm-hmm. And what do you see as far as Christians ignoring that, and then also you using that as a turning point in your story to kind of give yourself permission to think differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes what I see is that in the world of Christianity, we can get stuck on feeling and thinking and not the body or the instinct. We're told like the instinct may be sinful or bad, like our natural self is not good, so we don't trust it. And if you think about it, we are created in the image of a triune being. To quote St. Ignatius, he used the harmony model of the Enneagram, and he would say God is a triune being and we are created in the image of a triune being. So we have to pay attention to head, heart, and body, not just the head. And being told rules or facts and this is how we live, are not just our hearts and being so emotional or engaged in that way, but all three are valid and that's how we were created. So when I think back, there were a lot of times I would want to take care of my body, and my church even had a gym and we were allowed to use that gym, to take care of our body, but we were never taught to listen to the body. And there's a big difference.
Yeah. Just strengthen the body or get the body as healthy as possible, but the body's not involved when it comes to discerning what's right or wrong for you. If you've overextended yourself, if you're putting yourself in situations that are harmful or unhealthy, like none of that ever.
No. And in fact, I think the messages were more like, don't trust your body. Like, it's part of your natural man or whatever. And that was a them type of teaching, right? The worldly teaching, or people that are not godly, they do things like that. So I think fear was a big driving force in the Christian church that I was a part of.
Yeah.
And
so I guess what we would say, probably all three of us in agreement, say to our listeners today, is that if you're having physical symptoms, like one really basic one is anxiety. So I always say anxiety is not the enemy. It's our subconscious trying to communicate something to us. So if you're having any physical symptoms, those are things to pay attention to. They're warnings or indication lights that something is not going as healthy as it should for you, and we need to pause and take inventory. And it's important information. It's giving us information. You can't keep going under this type of stress level. You are human, and you're not taking care of yourself or putting yourself into the equation, as you were sharing in the last episode. And we're actually trying to gently communicate this to you by saying, hey, something is off. This isn't a pace or a load that you can continue to sustain, and you're not supposed to.
Right. It's not about grit.
Mm-hmm.
This is not about like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and pushing through for the sake of your children or the sake of your marriage.
And it's not a lack of faith to ask for help either, even if that's in the form of professional, sometimes
like a doctor,
medical help,
or a counselor, or coach.
Getting personal in here,
or a quote stretch class,
right?
But sometimes you have to turn down the volume on anxiety in order to be able to even hear what it has to say.
Yeah,
because otherwise you're just shutting down. And there's all kinds of different ways to turn that volume down, and it's not a lack of faith,
right,
to access those.
It's
thankfully.
Avoidance. My dance class saved me, I think. And what was so curious, and my dance teacher also was my coach, Laura Redmond, and she recognized the cathartic nature of what she was doing in the class and would very much give us permission. Now, you may see people crying in class and things may come up for you, and that's totally wonderful, because as you untangle things in the body, you begin to emote. And there were many times that I would end in sweat and tears, literally. Mm-hmm. And it would be so cleansing, because it was my body saying, look, I'm holding all of this, and you've got to move me to get it out. And pay attention, because I love you and we're dying here.
Well, Leigh, Kass and I just want to thank you so much for sharing, those insights and those hindsight perspectives. I think those are things that you can see more clearly now, but if we can just drop any of those nuggets into the lives of people that are either still in abusive situations or trying to come out, like any type of clarity or understanding is just so important. So we do want to thank you for sharing those with us today. And also, it is the redeeming part of your story is to share, these are the things that I now carry with me and know that I can impart to the next generation. And from a place of understanding and empathy. I hope our listeners have gleaned something from you today. I know that I have.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Thank you. I want to thank you for having me, and also just say, it's a process. It's an ongoing journey. There is no turning of the page and everything's rosy and now I have all this awareness and everything's perfect. I think it's going to be my life's work to continue to get back to myself and to live well. So I wish you guys well, and thank you for having me and allowing me to share this part of my journey.
Hi, listeners. If you've been enjoying these episodes, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave a rating and a review. It really helps spread the word about this podcast. Thanks for listening.